Welcome to our panel session for the South Pacific Passive House Conference. My name is Clare Parry. I'm from Hip v Hype. I'm joined here today for a panel session to meet the builders. One thing that became very apparent to me as I started my passive house journey was that all of the best intentions on paper mean nothing if we don't have these fantastic people on board. This level of expertise is incredibly critical in delivering the buildings that we want. Today I'm joined by three superstars, three people I've been very, very fortunate to work with on some amazing projects, including Danielle Savio, who's project manager at Multiplex, James Wewer, who's a sustainability manager for Vic and South Australia at Lendlease, and Rory Martin, who's a sustainability manager for Frasers Property. We're going to talk through today a few of the very important projects that we've seen come to the market in Australia. And we're going to discuss a few themes as well as have some fairly robust discussion about, how to bring more of these projects to market. So we'll start with, and I want to ask each of these people about some pretty amazing projects actually that have been delivered in Australia and are currently being delivered. So I asked them all to share with me a project that they've been very proud of participating in. And we'll start with Rory. This is one of yours. This is one that's actually in construction at the moment.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, the little house that could. It's funny. It's one house in a housing estate in Point Cook that we're building to passive house standard, but we're hoping that it actually has a big impact on our industry. So we play in the volume space when it comes to residential, and passive house has traditionally played out in that kind of architecturally designed one-off home kind of thing. So we raised a question about how could we help take passive house to the volume market. There's a whole backstory to this about how we actually got this project off the ground, but I might touch on that later on in the discussion. But at its core, what we're doing is that we're building one home to passive house standard. The home is under construction at the moment, and our intention then is that when it's completed, we will monitor its energy performance for 12 months. What's interesting as well, I think, certainly from our perspective, is that 2 streets over, we're building pretty much the identical house. Same design, same orientation, same massing, but built to business as usual. We're building it to code as you would, but we're also going to monitor the performance of that home for the same 12 months. So for us, it's a case of actually getting as much of a apples for apples comparison on how good passive house is, and this is the closest that we could do. And I guess we're in the privileged position where we actually get to trial this. So at the end of that, we want to be able to cross-examine how we build, how the industry builds really, and go, well, these are the low-hanging fruit that we can really turn the dial on this big part of the industry. And then this is what, really great design and execution looks like in the form of passive house. I guess, to get any of these, kind of initiatives off the ground, you have to do a little bit of horse trading internally sometimes. So one of the kind of deals I cut with our guys is that if they were up for passive house, that we wouldn't change the design. So this home, rightly or wrongly, has been designed without passive house in mind, but we were able to work through the design and up-spec the construction details, up-spec the performance, so that you have a house that looks like any other house, but you don't actually know what's under the hood. And I think that's kind of exciting as well, because it changes maybe perceptions around what a passive house home might or should look like. So yeah, look, that's one that I'm pretty proud of. But I think it's probably the only one because it's the only one I'm involved in. But I think what makes me really proud actually is that, normally with these things, people might assume that it's the sustainability head in an organization that's driving this. I have to say it's been our project team that have driven this and just owned it. Like, it's been a privilege for me because all I need to do is just sit back and connect dots occasionally. They're the ones that are working with the builders on the ground. They're ensuring that, the construction details are what they need to be. They're interacting with the consultant team, the builder, who I need to acknowledge, Creation Homes in this, who have been absolutely awesome to deal with so far. So for me, the source of pride comes from, helping build capacity in the business for our own teams to be able to kind of grab this and run. And the really cool thing is that, you know, we've got our colleagues in New South Wales and in Queensland looking over the ditch at what the guys are doing down in Vic, going, oh, yeah, what would that look like in New South Wales or Queensland, or how can we do that? And it's really amazing when you see project managers who, you know, actually have a natural passion for this kind of stuff, actually sharing the insights with their colleagues, doing the presentations internally about what they've learned. And, you know, I get to be a silent partner in a lot of this stuff. So, you know, for me, that's the kind of impact I like to see have with something like this. Not to mention the fact that, you know, industry has been really kind to us on this one. Like, you know, the in review have picked up this home because it's trying to shift the dial a little bit, as I say, moving into the volume space where, you know, we all know the impact of, you know, the mass volume market, resi construction, resi industry, and how much, you know, that really needs a little bit of a kick in the backside to move towards better quality, better performance. And probably one thing I'll share as well that kind of really encourages me about this is that this story didn't necessarily evolve from a conversation around sustainability internally. This actually evolved from a conversation around build form quality. Our team, you know, have been really excited about quality, and, you know, a lot of builders and developers cross-examine themselves about how do we improve the quality of what we're building. And we found that Passive House was a great opportunity to actually genuinely talk about true residential quality, because you can demonstrate it in, you know, the builds and the performance and what have you. But yeah, look, I think, you know, Claire, that's kind of the project that I'm really, really excited about at the moment.
Yeah, no, I was incredibly excited when this project also came across my desk as well, and it's been exciting to work with you on it. So it's in construction at the moment. When do you expect it to be completed?
Look, all going well. I'd really hope that we're there towards the end of this calendar year. You know, but ask me Christmas last year as to kind of when I think it'll be done, and I wouldn't have been able to predict for kind of what we've gone through. But look, I was on site on Monday, and I've got another little bit coming up on this house with a site photo, and talk to that. But you know, now that the guys are up and running, like they're just smashing it. Like the windows have arrived in from Germany, you know, they're ready to go. You know, we're procuring all the bits and pieces we need. You know, the other thing too about this home is that it's going to be all electric. You know, so we're really challenging this idea that, you know, the volume home, you know, growth corridors, it all has to be gas. Well, we're saying, well, actually, can we shift to, you know, an all electric home? Passive House part of that solution. You know, how does that play out in the decarbonisation of the grid as well? So are we, you know, hitting that kind of trifecta of better quality, lower bills, and you know, and better outcomes from a carbon perspective?
That's fantastic, yeah. And I'm really excited about what this might mean in the shift of what consumers start to ask for, as opposed to what they're given. So yeah, I find this a really exciting project, and yeah, we'll touch on this a lot more as we continue this conversation.
Claire, I'll probably say
Danielle.
one last thing. Like, sorry, I might just one last thing. I might just say, you know, really do appreciate the invite to come along today, because we do really want to share as much of this stuff as we can with the broader industry. You know, that's why we're talking about it. We had, you know, other builders on site that aren't involved in the project on Monday just to see what an inspection looks like, because there's no point in us trying to go and do this on our own. You know, we need our partners, you know, James and the guys at Lendlease, and, you know, tier 2s and tier 3s as well, to kind of understand what can be done, because that's the only way we get the whole industry moving in the same direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an important message. Danielle, this one is one that you and I work quite closely on together. Yeah, could you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah. So it's been a little while now since we finished Gillies Hall, which is nice, because it's nice to reflect on what we did. But essentially, Monash University have I guess a regime of building new housing stock on their campuses, obviously to house their students both locally and internationally. And we'd done some work with them over, I think, 2014, 2015 at their Clayton campus, where we built 4 residential buildings there to Green Star, kind of, you know, best case at the time in terms of trying to get a good performance and, you know, take on a sustainability agenda. But out of that, I think the university found that the buildings weren't performing fantastically, particularly over summer, where they got really hot. So when they started to do a master plan down at the Peninsula campus and look at what needed to be done down there, and wanted to invest in a new residential building on the campus, and then, you know, on top of that, looking at what we'd just done at Clayton, and trying to find, I guess, a better way to build, which landed them on Passive House. And fortunately for us, we won the project in early 2018, and were able to take it on board. So we did have an ECI arrangement to procure the CLT for the project. So for us, it was our first kind of foray into CLT, or mass timber construction. And that was chosen because obviously it fits really nicely in with the Passive House, I guess, airtightness, and also it's got a nice sustainability agenda in itself. And then we converted that ECI into the project. So yeah, first go at Passive House and first go at CLT. So I guess, yeah, from the initial build, we obviously won the project in March, and had CLT, I think, on site around June, July, and finished the project in early 2019. So just about 11 months for the build. There's 150 beds there, and all the performance data, I think, coming out of it so far is that it has been quite successful. It's also, I guess, raised for us, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more into the project, but into the presentation, but certainly raised for us, I guess, a number of things that would need to consider on the next build, particularly that the market, I guess, here is still quite new, and that comes with its own challenges in terms of procurement and delivering a project. We need to get a bit more sophisticated in ourselves and with our subcontractors in terms of, you know, the airtightness and things like that. But it's been, I guess, quite influential, I think, within the business itself in how we approach building. And I know we've just finished, I'm actually on site at La Trobe University, just finishing 2 residential buildings down there. They didn't quite go Passive House, but in essence, we've actually taken on a lot of the Passive House, I guess, methodologies and you know, strategies for how we went about the build, and how we kind of envisaged creating, you know, a really good thermal envelope, and really trying to go down a road of having a mechanical system that works really well and efficiently. So it's been quite influential, I think, in the business and for other organisations such as La Trobe University. So it's, I think Gillies Hall's been a really great, you know, standard set for universities, for student accom, and for I guess people trying to go for an agenda where the building's actually doing the performance and meeting its, I guess, sustainable credentials by performing well, rather than
it'd be really
dare I say, a bit of paperwork.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the performance data that does come out of this project, and I hope it's shared quite widely. And some of the data I'm really interested to see, if we can get it, is sort of the academic outcomes, you know, the quality of life and well-being, and potentially academic benefits that come for the students. So one thing I did want to highlight, because I know it's been touched on in quite a few presentations on this building, perhaps by the architects, is that the project delivery timeframe was incredibly condensed.
Yeah, I think so yeah, we built so we landed on site in March. We poured our first slab in May. As I said, I think we had CLT on site mid-June, and we handed over on the 25th of January. So it was just shy of 11 months to build 150 beds. I don't still to this day know how we kind of did it, but we did it. We did do things to accelerate the job, like we did spend a lot of additional money on craneage. I don't think we quite realised how crane dependent we'd be with the CLT, or we did, but we had a lot of issues. The building's on top of a hill out in Frankston near the beach, so it's a windy, rainy, crazy time to build CLT in winter. And we air freighted, I think, 60 glazed units from Germany to get us going there. We just couldn't meet the program without that. So it did come with some challenges there.
And you did have modularized bathrooms, I understand. So there was a little bit of modularization in internally as well.
Correct. Yeah.
It's a very exciting project. Yeah.
We would have done a lot more modularization, particularly on the facade, if we had the time out front to get that organized. We just didn't have that front end time. We basically hit the ground running and had to go. So lessons learned for next time.
Absolutely. Well, I think it is a really significant project on the Australian landscape, and I know it's got international press. So it's a very exciting one. And we'll keep talking about that as we go. Now, James, this is a very exciting project just completed. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks so much, Claire, and thanks for the invite to the panel. And I really enjoyed hearing more about Rory and Danielle's projects. The Monash Woodside Building for Technology and Design is a really significant project in terms of passive house. This one probably features from the scale perspective. As Rory and Danielle have said, every project that achieves passive house is really going to move our industry forward, whether it's large, small, in whatever sector we're in. The Woodside building is part of Monash University's commitment to net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And credit to Rob Brimblecombe and the team at Monash for leading the charge in this space for a number of years. So the building itself is a 16,000 square metre net building over at the Clayton campus, and it was completed April this year. So the key team members here were Grimshaw Architects, Oricon, Lendlease were the main contractor, and we had Efficiency Matrix on as the air tightness testing consultant. It is the largest passive house building in the Southern Hemisphere to the classic standard, and it's also our first, Australia's first commercial scale passive house building. So hopefully the learnings here can be applied into that commercial and large scale sector. Again, all electric, so moving towards that net zero ready future, and obviously part of Monash University's plan. So in terms of why I'm so proud of this building and proud of the team that delivered it, it was our first passive house project that we've delivered. And I think in the sustainability area that I've been in for a number of years, the passive house is a really strong sign of achievement, as we know, around thermal comfort, facade performance, air tightness. So to have a project come along where the clients briefed it in a competitive tender and for us to win and be able to commit to delivering was really fantastic. In terms of the way the team operated, so we worked closely with the consultants, and Clare, a shout to yourself as you have supported many projects working with yourself during that tender phase to make sure we were really across the requirements for passive house for this type of project. Obviously working in line with the tender documents before we put the price and the offer back in was really valuable. And then from then it was, as Danielle and Rory said, a real communication exercise. So during the tender phase with the team, I sat down and I'd done the passive house introduction training, which was really useful. It resonated a lot with some of the training I'd undertaken previously, but reinforced passive house principles, and ran a bit of a session with the team during the tender process to make sure that the cost planning team, the construction management team, the project management team were all across the principles of Passive House, and we put one of our key team members onto the Passive House tradesperson course, which was really invaluable to have that expertise coming back from the Passive House training. During the tender phase, we obviously looked at the documentations we had. There was a view taken on insulation requirements required, detailing that we need to work on, completion of the Passive House planning package, and we went in with confidence with the offer back. Once the project was won, which we were absolutely delighted about, and I think one of the things we'll talk about today is this is in the competitive tender scenario. So I think Passive House as a brief requirement creates a platform and a level playing field when we're tendering. I think the competitive tendering field from a main contractor perspective can lead to inconsistencies in what's being offered back. So I think when there's a Passive House requirement put in place, the template it provides in terms of the hardwired outcomes that are needed to be provided, and the documentation during the install creates that level playing field. And then we'll come on to some of the other points, obviously in more detail, but touching on what made me so proud about this building was the way our team and the consultant team worked together to really communicate broadly across the team to make sure that the requirements of Passive House were made aware across the inductions for all the subcontractors. We put together what we called a Passive House detailing manual for all of the non-standard details. The team worked up a manual of all the joints, the junctions where insulation would be required, where tightness wrapping would be required, where thermal bridging would be required to be minimized. Importantly, marked up where those elemental materials would be needed, also who was responsible, so which contractor subby would be responsible, and also hold points to say, don't build beyond this point until we've had a check and we've taken photographs and we've reviewed. So that Passive House detailing manual for the project team was a really good fundamental communication tool for the team. We also made sure that everyone on our team was responsible for their element of Passive House delivery. So whether it was a foreman or an engineer, the subcontractors were all made aware of their own individual requirements. And then it came down to the rigor and the QA. So making sure we had an air tightness champion on site that did site walks daily, took lots of photographs during the install process, made sure it's being recorded. We used PlanGrid to upload photographs to the exact position of the detail on electronic documentation, put the comments in place, and then we had a bit of a QA process saying if there is a bit of rectification required, goes through to the engineer and foreman group, then we decide the outcome we want, then goes to the subcontractor. So we're not leaving it to the subcontractor to decide how to fix up an issue and then kind of seeing what comes back. We're saying this is the standard we want, and then it goes to the subbies, and then we had a weekly subcontractor meeting to sort of see how that went. Working closely with the air tightness team as well was key. So working with efficiency matrix to work on the air barrier line, make sure we're scheduling apertures and penetrations going through the air barrier line, checking for any points of weakness, and then again snagging through the build. So I think the detail that was put into this job, the shared ownership of the outcome, the pride that everyone took really in delivering this, and now when I still speak with the team, there's a real pride about what was done. And again, the lessons learned that can be taken forward to future projects. So lots of reasons to be proud on this one.
Indeed, yeah. Yeah, I think we do need to credit Monash University in particular, and I really do think that they've changed the industry. And I think these two projects actually do showcase that quite well, and particularly Rob Brimblecombe, and he's going to be very embarrassed that I call him out, but his dedication to pushing this as hard as he has really shifted what we do, particularly at this scale.
Agree with that. And hopefully I credit him as well. I totally agree, because there is an investment to be made to getting a building of this quality. It will pay back and it will become a reduced investment. It's not a large on cost, but there are some investments that need to be made, and bringing the client team on board. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and as that owner occupier, that's a very important picture to paint as well. It definitely will pay back. So I think from there, that leads us quite nicely into, and I think you probably all just briefly touched on it. You know, what is it that, you know, now that you've encountered Passive House, now that you've got your hands dirty, or getting your hands dirty, as in Rory's case, what's your favourite challenge? And I'm going to start back with you, James. You shared this with me.
So this is from the Passive House Designer's Manual, and it sums up in one paragraph what I really love about the Passive House methodology in the well-established template. So the template for ultra-low energy building that we know it's economic and resource efficient, it provides the occupant comfort in the outcome, and obviously all important resilience to future climate change. So the reason I wanted to highlight this is it does, for a number of reasons, support teams in producing high performance buildings, closing the performance gap that there may be if we're not using Passive House. The fact that there's a Passive House planning package can help architects, can help engineers understand how the efficiency of their facade, how the efficiency of their services is actually comparing towards the peak load minimization or reduction, and thermal bridging in the design. So obviously buildings need to look great, they need to function, they need to meet the client need, but to have this template to work in parallel to show that they're on track or not as the concept runs through with this really high performance established proven template, I think is so valuable, and takes away some of the discussion or time needed to work out, is it high performance or not? What does high performance mean when people use the term high performance? And I think this template it is such a key factor. Also, the fact that the template calls for such rigorous as-built evidence, the documentation, the photography. It's not a case of being able to say, here's the design, you know, here's the modeling, we're on track, that's great. This actually says, well, let's follow through and let's have a means to show and prove to the Institute through that process, so that it really makes sure that the commitment that's made to a high performance building is quantified and it's delivered. And I think that's so important, particularly in the space of the hard tender process, where there can be differences, as I said before, in what's offered back, in terms of interpreting what high performance is. So that for me is what I love. It's applicable to many, if not all, building types. So this is my big tick for Passive House, amongst other things.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting to hear about the education process that you've particularly gone through as you've approached this, and a couple of really important points there around quality, the performance gap that we are trying to eliminate, and Passive House and the strength in its approach in that regard. Rory, you shared this picture with me, and yeah, I was hoping you could sort of elaborate.
Sure, thanks, Claire. I feel like I'm about to repeat a lot of things that James has just said with a slightly different accent.
Great.
We can hold off to another day, which accent is actually better. But anyway, look, this photo is less than a week old. This was our first site inspection, so our first hold point at Point Cook. So what you can see is myself there in the foreground, hands in the pockets as usual, with just kind of looking at what's going on around me. You've got our project team there. You've got subbies, the concreters there, looking at what's going on before the slab gets poured. Slab is now poured as well. So we passed our inspection. You've got actually other contractors there who are not involved in this project at all, coming for a sticky beak, looking to learn as well. And then, as you can see, right in the center of the shot, you've got two of the guys from Creation Homes, the contractors, holding up an iPhone. And on the other end of the iPhone is Marcus from Groon doing an inspection via Teams, because unfortunately due to COVID, poor Marcus couldn't get out to see us. So big shout out to Marcus and Danielle for for definitely bringing a little bit of innovation to it. But literally we walked around like a little herd of sheep, looking at all the little details and making sure that the camera got close enough to every bit of tape that Marcus and Danielle could get comfort, from what they were seeing. And look, all this comes down to one thing for me, and what I love about Passive House is the accountability. There's no pass in the book on this. Everybody has to be involved. Like, there was a really, really cool, you guys all know, you're further down the road on Passive House projects than me, but Passive House keeps on throwing up all these cool little things that you just didn't think of until you're actually in the ground. So for example, the concreters, when they were looking at this, before we installed the bed with which the insulation would sit on, they said, well, let's switch it from, let's say, crushed rock, which you might normally have done, to actual sand. The sand is going to better protect the insulation. It's going to get a much more level bed for which the insulation can sit on. We got to a point down the far end of this photograph where the slab actually extended beyond the bounds of the installation to pick up a column that was coming down. Obviously, that's a risk then from thermal insulation. So with the subbies, with the head contractor, with Marcus on the blower, we sat down and we worked through different ways of doing it. And long story short, we found a way on site, separate the base of the column from the slab, slap in a little bit of insulation, and you've just reduced another thermal bridge. So, that, I just love that. I love that everyone, no one person has all the answers for this. Like, Clare, all credit to yourself and Marcus in terms of taking ourselves through a journey on this. But again, it still goes on. It's not a case of hashtag done deal when you've designed it and you've got your planning through. This is going to be with you until you actually have that little bit of plaque. So for me, in my experience, I haven't seen anything as rigorous on site, bringing everyone to account. And what I love is that, Creation, they went out, themselves, and they put their guys through some of the passive house training. We did the same as you, James. We sent through some of our team through the introductory course. One big tip to everyone is just get your tradies, get the guys and girls that are on the tools out to the tradesperson course. I'm not getting a commission for plugging it, but just seeing our guys coming back after doing that course, just raving about how they want to do things different, how the way that they can build can be changed with just some really small different ways of thinking is really encouraging. So for me, this is one example of, this is one house, but thousands of photographs that are going to go into it at each and every whole point that we need to work through. I could only imagine the gigs of photographs you guys have from doing larger buildings as well, where you have to have that accountability and that, that demonstration that you're actually walking the walk. And I haven't seen, a process or a standard kind of put the onus on actually walking the walk as much as I have with Passive House. I suspected it. Rob Brimblecombe, again, to put a bit of colour on his cheeks, but also acknowledge his ability to share and engage. He took me for a walk through Monash a couple of years ago and showed me some of the work he was doing, almost pre-Passive House days, of where he was looking to get. So it's amazing to see kind of where they are now. But that man's got scars to show you if ever you catch him at an event or anything. But Rob's kind of insights about what to look out for when you do attempt one of these buildings, regardless of scale, is invaluable. So look, for me, in summary, it's the accountability, and there's no room for wallflowers if you're going to do a Passive House project.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the Passive House community is how willing people are to share their mistakes, and it's been fabulous. And I hope one thing that everyone takes away from Passive House is that it's not easy. It looks simple, it's not easy, but also it's okay to admit when you don't know the answer to something. And it's so exciting to see that you're sharing your journey with people who aren't even involved, which is great. Danielle, the thousands of kilometres of tape. What have you got here?
I think before I get into tape, I probably just want to second what Rory and James said. I think what's interesting is we often work in a D&C arrangement, and what I've found is that the D component of that, I guess, is a little controlled when you're working on a passive house. It's almost like we might be working in a D&C project, but the PHPP model is kind of keeping you constrained to what you actually need to deliver. So that comes with, I guess, a little bit of from a builder's perspective, a little bit of a financial and time risk. But it's interesting to see, I guess, how everyone kind of gets on board with that, because they kind of know that they're going to be delivering such a, high performing building at the end of the day. But I think what I found or what I enjoyed the most about the delivery was the airtight line, or the thermal envelope as a whole. And what I found fascinating with it is that you can obviously sit down and have a set of drawings which document all the you know, where the line is going to go, and then you can scope that up with subcontractors and tell them you're delivering this bit, you're delivering this bit. But then the actuality of visualizing that 2D or 3D if you have a model line on the actual building is actually quite a bit of a challenge spatially. You know, we do work with people that are used to, I guess, spatial visualization, but it can be quite a challenge, and trying to articulate that to trades continually every day is tough. So we ended up with, like, I guess, a lot of tape everywhere, in every nook and cranny, as you can see here. We also ended up with tape a lot of the time on places where we didn't need tape, internal walls, you know, various spots in staircases. So it's actually, it is a real challenge for us. I mean, it was our first time. We had quite a young team to, you know, articulate that information from a drawing onto site, and then you know, get everyone on board with the level of detail that they need to deliver. So, you know, it's not just slapping the tape on and hoping for the best. It's actually making sure that it's done correctly and done right. And, you know, there was a little bit of like trial and error in that too. Sometimes we had certain surfaces where we tried one tape and we found it wasn't working that great, and, you know, we got on the phone to other people that could help us, particularly Efficiency Matrix, you know, is there another product that would work better in this scenario, and had to kind of workshop things as we were going, which was really good. But I think, you know, making sure that we get that, I think I was most skeptical about being able to deliver that airtight envelope. And I think that, because of that, we put a lot of energy and time into it. And I think that made for a better outcome, in that we knew that when we got to the point where we kind of did a first preliminary test, that we were, you know, we'd put in the QA, we'd put in the time, we'd put in the detail. And we actually did the test early enough that we could kind of still access everything if we needed to, but late enough that obviously everything was sealed up. So we didn't quite get there on our very first test. I think we got a 0.7 or something like that. So we were kind of like able to get back into places, you know, we'd left final claddings off things and things like that to be able to get back in there, check our ceiling, make sure everything was 100%. And then when we did the final test, we were pretty confident we were going to pass, and we did. But I think, yeah, that trying to, I guess, articulate the design onto site in a meaningful way that people can understand, particularly if they haven't been involved in a passive house, is really important until our industry gets, you know, more conscious and more aware of, you know, the principles and how to deliver a passive house.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a story to share. I might share it in a little minute, but we've also got. I wanted to ask you, what are the lessons that were hard fought, and not necessarily mistakes, but you know, hopefully they weren't. But you know, sometimes mistakes are important. So what did we learn? What's our biggest thing that we want to share with our audience? And I'm going to jump straight back into Gilly's Hall again here.
Yeah, I think James said before, he's got quite a few lessons learned, and I think we certainly feel that way too. And I'm sure Rory, in a few months' time, will have a whole list as well. But I think for us, our biggest challenge was really the roof. We had, I guess, a lot of trouble, and I think it was partially to do with the CLT. The CLT is obviously quite a natural product, and it holds a lot of moisture. And by the time we got to the roof, we were kind of, you know, coming into the warmer months, and we were just finding that timber was just giving off a lot of moisture. And obviously we're going through taping joints and finding that the moisture coming out of the timber was just causing the tape to pop. And that timber was also forming that airtight line. So we actually did a lot of experimenting up there with different tapes, different epoxies, trying to make sure that we were able to, you know, close those gaps. We also had like a lot of separation of the top lamella of the CLT, and obviously as that separates and creates gaps as they come into a join, they're just channels for air. So it was quite a challenge, and I think that it was something that we, you know, we'd done so much work on the airtight line and the envelope, and we'd gotten rid of so much things like thermal bridging and made everything work, and then we got to the end on the roof and we had major issues. So and you know, we want to get, it's a timber building, so you want to get your roof on as fast as you can so you don't have moisture coming into the building, and yet we couldn't close up until we were confident that, you know, it was airtight. So that was probably the biggest build challenge for us. But I think in hindsight, probably the biggest lessons learned were that procurement wise, we're still, I guess, a very young market here in Australia. So you're really locked into suppliers that often aren't used to dealing with a big builder, and the timeframes on, you know, a tier 1 scale project. They're often suppliers that might not, you know, be local. So you're obviously trying to procure things mainly from Europe, which is always a challenge. And we tended towards buying, you know, I guess maybe the Rolls Royce of products because we're just too scared to do anything else. Whereas I would hope that next time we can maybe trial and error, you know, some more local products and other products from around the world to try and get some better value there. But I think you have to, as we're still a young market here, I think we're going to have to kind of accept that that's a challenge in the medium term that any project is going to have, that you're kind of at the behest of those suppliers. I think, yeah, I think we also learned that obviously you have to engage with the industry, which I think is probably a lesson learned across the board here, and that collaboration is really key. And you're going to be very heavy on the design and procurement side for a project, particularly at scale. Yeah, so you need to have that time up front to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. The procurement issue is a really interesting one, and I know the market's moved a lot, even in the last 2 to 3 years, so including local options, but the Chinese supplier market has come a huge way. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Now, James, you had some points here that I fundamentally agree with, but it was really great to see them from you.
Thanks, Claire, and probably building again on what Danielle has said and what Rory, I'm sure, will mention as well. I think in terms of shortlisting lessons learned, which I wanted to do, there were a number, but the one I've started with here is aiming for that early contractor engagement with the design team. So the design team has a lot of knowledge around Passive House. It's custodian of the Passive House planning package. Obviously, is creating this amazing building, and then it goes to tender. I think the ECI procurement form, or a form where we can bring the main contractor in early to help really consolidate by joining up the subcontract market and what's possible and what can be done, and how we can meet those PHPP values, and actually helping the design team complete the PHPP to the level of detail, reviewing all of the junctions and really getting into the detail of how the design is going to be put together is really important in terms of working to our strengths as a broad team. So I think this worked well at the Woodside building. We had sessions where we had Oricon and the facade subcontract together in meetings, running through how we're going to really confirm down to sort of gasket details that the facade contractor will use, and confirming back into the planning house package. So I think that early main contractor or early builder engagement is really invaluable, and I think shouldn't put people off an early contractor involvement form. We're still going to get good pricing, but I think it's really important to run through that detail as early as possible with the construction partner. The second one, again, we're probably reinforcing this a few times, but the rigor required around the detail that the whole team needs to get on board with from a QA perspective. on site to really verify that installation. So I think we chose early to put a site air tightness champion in place. That was one of our team members that had gone through the training for the tradesperson course. Although ownership was shared across the team, as we've said as a panel, we had one person that was doing the daily site walks with Efficiency Matrix, looking at the detailing, taking photographs. We used cameras to sort of go behind, in between various construction details to check that wouldn't be visible by physically looking at it, to check internally what was happening. So there was a really strong rigor around that installation. And I think in terms of QA as well, was the benefit gained from the off-site air tightness testing we did. There's probably about 5 different elements around the facade and the roof detailing that were tested off-site from an air tightness perspective, and a couple of them failed first time. So if we hadn't done that test off-site, it would have become quite challenging and expensive to rectify or find out too late on site. So as part of the QA, including the off-site testing. So they're probably the 2 from the shortlist.
Yeah, the on-site air tightness champion has been something I've read about a lot, particularly on the international scene, and really great to see that that's something you adopted. Rory, you shared this image with me, which I love to hear more about.
Thanks, Claire. And yeah, look, I guess given where we are in the process, I feel if I was to use a sporting analogy, I feel like we're an academy player who's ready to step up to the big league. We've studied everyone in the off season. We've had the right diet and coaching around us. We're about to step onto the pitch, but there's 2 centre backs who've been around a while, and they're going to teach us about the reality of what we got ourselves in for. So maybe ask me in another year or 2 when we've got a bit of data and we've built the house exactly what the lessons have been. But I couldn't agree more, on the points of, getting the right people around you, looking for contractors, who can get involved and who have a little bit of experience. So I can't acknowledge, and thank Creation Homes enough for their work today on site. So that being said, I think, I'd take a little bit of a different angle in terms of lessons learned for us. In Frasers, we've been looking at Passive House probably for about 5 or 6 years, and all credit to Maureen Calmetz, my colleague up in New South Wales, who's been a champion of Passive House as well. And we tried once or twice to get Passive House up previously unsuccessfully. But what changed the game for us and actually getting that internal buy-in this time around was, prior to embarking on Passive House in Point Cook, we actually spent a lot of time with our customers, starting at a high level, what does sustainability mean to you? Drilling down through the myriad of different things around rating systems and quality of life and health and well-being and energy. And, one thing that really resonated when we spoke to our customers about, when we talked about geothermal and solar and batteries and all these different things we're playing with, was that they summarize a lot of this stuff that we try to deliver in the industry as just being a good quality home. That's what we expect. It's a house that will keep you warm in winter, cool in summer, and doesn't cost an arm and a leg to do so. And it was a little bit of a eureka moment, when we looked around and said, well, Christ, that's what Passive House aims to do. So we repositioned. It's such a simple thing, but it was just a marked change. And I'm sure, you've all had these kind of experiences when you slightly tweak the framing, but all of a sudden you align with your customers' values. So all of a sudden we repositioned Passive House about being a great initiative from a sustainability perspective to actually being a great initiative from a quality perspective. And the challenge was put back to our business. If we really want to put our hand on our heart and say that we build high quality homes, then Passive House is a great yardstick with which to measure ourselves by. So all of a sudden, Passive House was giving us that yardstick to measure, but also it gave us that ability to go back to our customers and credibly say, look, this is what it can be. This is what a good quality home can look like. And we haven't sold this Passive House yet. It's the only house in the development that hasn't sold, because we actually don't know how to bring this back to the market. There's been a lot of interest, externally, internally. Then you go, well, how do we maximize, the exposure of this? Do you put it to auction? Do you kind of, how do you engage? How do you get the message out there? We do want to open the doors before we sell it, for people to actually have a look through and see what it feels like, not just the public, but also contractors as well, because it's not too often that you just get that ability to do that. So, look, for us, I think the big lesson is just nailing the value proposition. And if anyone, who's trying to get a passive house project up is, really grappling with this and finding they're getting a little bit of pushback, maybe take a step back and think about exactly what is it your stakeholder is looking for and how can passive house help achieve that. It's a simple thing, but it makes such a big difference to actually how you get support behind these kinds of projects.
Absolutely. I think there's a way to frame passive house for everybody. That's been my conclusion after a decade of doing it, which is incredibly exciting. Now, I have a bonus question, and it's one that I'm I guess it's been on my mind for a long time. How do we actually build the necessary capacity in the industry? How do we make sure that, bringing the builders on board is incredibly critical, but there are a whole lot of other parts to delivering a passive house building, and how do we get all those little parts of our big system up and ready, and how do we make this the new norm? And I don't know who to start with here, so anybody can jump in.
I have a very strong feeling on this, to be honest, Claire, and I think we've talked about this, that it needs to come from the top, and it needs to be a legislative change that pushes for high performing buildings.
Yeah,
it
is really exciting to see the little bits of passive house are kind of creeping into the code. We're starting to see this suggestion that there might sometime in the future, now you have the option for blower door testing to measure compliance or to demonstrate compliance. It's not mandatory and it's not in the residential code, but the little elements are there, and I can see them. They're broadly sitting in the code there, but how do we package them all together? There is a fear that the industry won't be able to deliver if we push too fast and too hard. Be interested in your
I'll probably add then, while we wait for code to catch up with industry, I reckon maybe an open doors policy for those of us that are playing in this space. Just keep sharing. Keep drawing attention to what you're doing. Start looking at those that may not have been playing in this space before. Like, we had no idea that we were going to find 2 contractors on site when we went out last Thursday, but it was just awesome to see that there was just 2 guys there learning what a competitor was doing. And it comes back to that point of collaboration, Claire, that you mentioned earlier, is that if we as a group or as maintain this open door policy, that's the best way to learn. Like, I think we've all heard the anecdotes of when passive houses are being built previously, and they're kind of they're at that point where they're insulated and maybe taped up, but there's a lot of work still to be done. That's the house that the builders like to have their lunch in, because that's going to be warmest, and all of a sudden they've got a connection to it. So it might go a little bit against the air tightness mantra, but definitely I think an open door policy from a collaboration perspective is key to driving change while we wait for code to mature, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't necessarily feel like it's the codes that need to catch up there. I think the government as a whole needs to get on board. I know that cities such as New York and places like that are really looking at how they're going to adapt to climate change, and I think that Melbourne Council or the local governments can really get on board with things like that.
Yeah. James, do you have any thoughts on capacity building?
Sure, Claire. So I had there were sort of 4 areas, and Danielle and Rory have covered 2, which is great. We're completely aligned on that one. So in no particular order, I was thinking around the training, so upskilling of professionals from consultancy through to the contractors, and that might be including passive house training in key degree qualifications, in vocational courses. I know when I did the introductory course, I just thought this has to be in every single architectural degree. And I know the degree I did in quite a few years ago in the UK, there was a lot of content, but I hope that we can get this in every, certainly architectural degree, another key building engineering, and through to the vocational courses. So things like block work is not airtight. We need to demystify and really bring people on board as to what can and what will work for passive house. I also had the knowledge share. So obviously sessions like this where we share, as you pointed to, Claire, around passive house, the industry is really sharing well, but we need to broaden that and demystify the people that aren't in the tent yet. So I was a little disappointed to hear in the sort of, I was having a conversation with someone in the Lendlease volume home building space. They'd spoken to a builder about Passive House, and anecdotally, the builder had come back and said, it's gonna double the cost. I just thought, give me the phone number. I want to have a chat through. We need to. This is really serious. That language is going around there. It needs to be demystified, and we need to really talk this through, because that sort of hearsay is not what we need, and it's not the case. So the cost premium for Woodside, and it's mentioned in another presentation, was about 2.5% of construction cost, which is actually not significant.
Especially given the benefit.
Yeah. Given the benefit, it will pay back. As Rob himself has said, you can't really put a premium on getting a quality building to know what's been delivered aside of the paybacks from operation, and to have that comfort. So inclusion in briefs, I think the more clients that can actually brief Passive House and that can get their teams on board, like Rory's talked about his journey getting Frasers to brief, the team with Monash, making sure it's in the brief, level that playing field, get it in the tender documents. It's the cheapest way to buy Passive House. Get it in the brief. When you're getting 3 or 4 different people using the smarts to kind of tender. And then I did have to mention the NCC as well. I do sometimes cringe at some of the where we are with NCC. I know we've got lots of opportunity, but it will bring, dare I say, the majority of the industry across if it's a minimum legal requirement to one day hopefully meet Passive House standards, or as you say, Claire, meet the key requirements of Passive House. And I think that's really when we're going to raise the bar from a legal perspective and future-proof homes and buildings for comfort, climate resilience, and all the things that we really need.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I think it's been a really robust discussion, and I'm very, very grateful. I do know all of you very well, and we could speak for hours, and I know that we already have over various events and over drinks. And I really hope that this conversation has started to prompt a little bit more discussion in the industry. You know, if all of the, you know, if your teams can deliver these incredibly market-changing projects, why can't we all? And yeah, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Rory. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, folks.
All right, I think that's